Hi, veterans. Today we're going to talk about VA compensation for Gulf War veterans' illnesses. So, not long after the Gulf War began in 1991 and continuing through the Iraq War, veterans began returning home with a bunch of mysterious illnesses, difficult to treat problems, fatigue, joint pain, skin rashes, respiratory issues, and then high numbers of some really concerning diseases like ALS. So, as early as 1994, Congress passed a law to address these issues. And the idea being that even though the science hadn't caught up with what was going on, Congress wanted VA to recognize that these were real problems and to provide both health care and compensation to veterans who had these issues. The bad news is VA continues, even after 30 years, to deny upwards of 90% of these claims. So it's important, if you're going to file a Gulf War illnesses claim, you want to understand what you're filing and what are the specific conditions which VA will compensate and which you can get health care for. VA doesn't consider Gulf War syndrome a term that they recognize. However, there are a whole bunch of specific conditions, both diagnosed and undiagnosed, which are considered compensable by VA. So let's talk real quick about who is a Gulf War veteran for VA purposes. It's actually a bigger group than you might think because it's not just the 1991 Gulf War. It's anyone who served in the Southwest Asia Theater of Operations after August 2nd, 1990, all the way up to the present. So that includes countries like Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and so on and so forth. People who served in the Persian Gulf or who flew over airspaces above those locations. There's a full list in my blog post. And there are some other conditions that we'll just talk about in a little bit that also are compensable for people who served in Afghanistan and Djibouti. So let's talk about what types of conditions these include. Presumptive conditions for Gulf War veterans, there's four main categories. One is fairly new, and that is particulate matter exposure conditions. And these are primarily called burn pit exposures, and that includes rhinitis, sinusitis, and asthma. Then there are what's known as chronic multi-symptom illnesses. These can include things like fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, functional gastrointestinal disorders. The third category is undiagnosed chronic illnesses. And so these are signs and symptoms which do not have a formal diagnosis, and we'll get into exactly how that works. And then finally, there are diseases that are just endemic to the region. So for your particulate matter exposures, that includes all of the Gulf War theater that we talked about from August 2nd, 1990, and then starting after September 11th, 2001, it also includes Afghanistan and Djibouti. And what that particular presumption is that if you are diagnosed with asthma or rhinitis or sinusitis within 10 years of serving in the military, then that is to be automatically considered service-connected. So that's what a presumption is. The presumption is that the nexus between your exposure to particulate matter and this illness is just considered a matter of law. I do note in my blog post that the House has just recently passed legislation which will significantly expand the number of conditions which are applicable to burn pits and particulate matter and other toxic exposures. The Senate hasn't voted on this yet, so it's not law yet. The president has called for it to be passed into law. Okay, the third category is something called that are referred to as MUCMEs. They're medically unexplained chronic multi-symptom illnesses. So these are illnesses which are diagnosable and which do not have a clear medical explanation. So that could include fibromyalgia, of chronic fatigue syndrome, functional gastrointestinal disorders. So that would be things like IBS or dyspepsia, unexplained vomiting, constipation, abdominal pain. So those are all things that can fit under functional gastrointestinal disorders. Sometimes celiac disease can be service-connected under that. And for those conditions, the criteria, along with your service in the Gulf War Theater, is they must be a minimum of 10% disabling, and they must be 10% disabling before December 31st, 2026. That period has been, it was initially 2 years, and then they expanded it to 5, and then 10, and then 20. And so Congress and the VA continue to extend that deadline. And the reason why is because they've not still identified all of the sources of what can cause these problems. And so the deadline continues to expand. So the third area we'll talk about is undiagnosed illnesses. These often include fatigue, unexplained rashes, headaches, muscle pain, joint pain, neurological symptoms, respiratory symptoms, sleep disturbances. There's a full list again in the blog post. In order to service these conditions, they have to be chronic, they have to be 10% disabling, and here's the tricky part, you must not have a diagnosis for the condition. Sometimes it can be this one is one of the tougher areas to service connect, because what you'll see happen is you have this condition, it's recorded in your medical records that you've gone to the doctor for it, you submit your statements or whatever, and then you go to your CMP exam, and the CMP examiner gives a diagnosis, and then VA turns it down. They're wrong to do that, and that's something that you can fight on appeal. Okay, the last area is endemic diseases. This can include brucellosis, Q fever, malaria, leishmaniasis, West Nile virus, a number of other diseases that are common in Southwest Asia, and which are fairly uncommon amongst veterans, but they do get them. And if they appeared within, in most cases, 1 year of serving in Southwest Asia, then it should be automatically, or rather 1 year of service, then those should be automatically service connected. In some cases, such as leishmaniasis and the Mycobacterium tuberculosis, there is no time limit on those. So again, these claims, the statistics show that Gulf War veterans claims get denied upwards of 90% of the time. And so when you're planning on filing one of these claims, you want to try to gather your best evidence right out the door, and make sure that you include, your service, the diagnosis, the time period, what happened sometimes, for instance, like with that 10-year deadline for asthma, for example, that you had to show symptoms or a manifestation of that illness within the 10 years. And if that's not in your medical records, then it can be difficult to prove. However, bear in mind that it's considered relevant evidence if someone witnessed you having those symptoms even before the diagnosis. So you can submit your own statement that describes the history of your illness, a spouse, a friend, a buddy from the military, any of those sources can help provide that data. You can't, as a veteran, unless you have a medical degree, put in a statement that says, that you have asthma, for instance. You wouldn't necessarily diagnose that or sinusitis or whatever. What you would do is you would describe the symptoms. You can't breathe. You have difficulty with your sinuses hurt all the time. You get headaches. When you describe those symptoms, it's the VA's job to consider what the condition is. So when you get ready to file these claims, you want to make sure that you have as much information as possible that's clearly spelled out for the rater. And then if you're part of the 90% that gets turned down, then the next step is to identify why it got turned down, and you'll get a document that looks something like, I'm going to cover up my social security number on here. This is actually one of mine. You'll get a document that looks like this. That's a rating decision, and it will actually lay out what each issue is on your claim and why it was granted or denied. And then that gives you the ammunition you need to fight your claim in an appeal. And I do want to put out there that I'm taking new clients. We're always interested in helping out veterans on their appeals, and you can fill out the intake form on the website if you're interested in a case evaluation. Thank you very much.